Iron John, a modern tale. The city sprawled beneath the night sky, like a circuit board of lights and shadows, its streets humming with the electric pulse of 1,000 lives intersecting and diverging in endless patterns. And somewhere on the outskirts, where the factories had long fallen silent, and nature crept back through cracked concrete, there lived a mystery that the digital age had not quite managed to explain. Part 1. The Discovery. There's something out there, Marcus Chen said to his computer screen, scrolling through yet another thread on the Urban Exploration Forum. I'm telling you, I've seen the footage. He was 17, with restless hands that were never far from a keyboard or a game controller, and eyes that had learned to see the world as a series of puzzles waiting to be solved. His bedroom walls were covered with maps, some of real places, others from the fantasy games he spent hours navigating. And in the corner sat his pride and joy. A custom-built drone equipped with a camera that could see in the dark. The forum posts he was reading spoke of a wild man, a figure spotted in the abandoned industrial zone on the city's eastern edge. Some called it an urban legend. Others swore they'd seen him with their own eyes. A tall, powerful figure, moving through the ruins with impossible grace, surrounded by animals that seemed to obey his unspoken commands. There were videos, grainy and shaking, that showed shadows and movement, but never quite revealed the truth. Probably homeless, his mother had said when he'd mentioned it at dinner. Leave those poor people alone, Marcus. But Marcus knew it was something more. He could feel it the way a gamer senses a hidden level, a secret just beyond the obvious path. That night, when the house had fallen quiet, and the city's nocturnal rhythm had taken over from its daytime chaos, Marcus carried his drone to the rooftop. The abandoned factory zone lay spread before him like a graveyard of ambition, its skeletal structures reaching toward the stars. He launched the drone with practiced ease, watching through his phone screen as it soared over streets and parks, heading toward the restricted area where the authorities had placed warning signs and chain link fences. The drone's camera switched to infrared as it glided over the factory grounds. Marcus guided it between rusted towers and collapsed warehouses, his heart beating faster with each passing minute. He was deep in forbidden territory now, the kind of place that could get him in serious trouble if anyone found out. Then he saw it. At first, it looked like just another ruin, a brick building with most of its roof caved in and vegetation growing through every crack. But as the drone circled lower, Marcus noticed something odd. There were bars on one of the remaining windows, newer than the rest of the structure, gleaming dully in the infrared. And behind those bars, a heat signature. Large, human-shaped, moving. No way? Marcus whispered. He brought the drone closer, angling the camera for a better view. The figure inside seemed to sense the machine's presence, turning to look directly at it. For a moment that stretched into eternity, Marcus felt as though he were being seen. Truly seen. Through all the layers of technology and distance. Then, the figure moved, and Marcus gasped. With a single gesture, as casual as waving away a fly, the man inside the cage seemed to summon a gust of wind that sent the drone tumbling. Marcus fought with the controls, barely managing to guide it away from the building before it crashed. His hands were shaking as he brought the drone home. But along with the fear, there was exhilaration. He had found something real, something impossible. The next day, Marcus returned to the factory on foot. He told his parents he was studying at the library, told his friends he had family obligations. The lies came easily, as they always did when adventure called. The fence was easy enough to climb, the warning signs easy enough to ignore. Marcus had been exploring abandoned places since he was 14, always careful, always prepared. He carried a backpack with water, a flashlight, his phone, and a multi-tool his grandfather had given him years ago. The building looked different in daylight, more mundane, more obviously dangerous with its crumbling walls and rusted metal. Marcus picked his way through debris, following the mental map he'd created from the drone footage. The barred window was on the 3rd floor, accessible by an exterior fire escape that groaned ominously under his weight. When he reached the window, his breath caught in his throat. Inside, in what had once been a factory office, was a man unlike any Marcus had ever seen. He was tall, perhaps 6.5 feet, with broad shoulders and long hair the color of iron that fell past his shoulders. His skin seemed weathered by sun and wind and time itself. He wore clothes that looked handmade, stitched from leather and rough fabric, and around him on the floor sat various animals, a red fox, a pair of crows, a raccoon, even a small deer. They arranged themselves around him as though he were a king holding court. The man looked up, and his eyes met Marcus's. They were gray as storm clouds, ancient and knowing. "You're the one with the flying machine?" the man said. His voice was deep and rough, as though it hadn't been used for conversation in a very long time. "The one who watches from above." Marcus swallowed hard. Yes, that was my drone. "I'm sorry if I disturbed you." "Disturbed me." The man laughed, a sound like distant thunder. "Boy, I've been disturbed for 3 years now. Locked in this cage, by people who fear what they don't understand. Your little machine was the most interesting thing to happen in months." 3 years. Marcus pressed closer to the bars. "Why are you here? Who are you?" "They call me Iron John," the man said, rising to his feet with a fluid grace that belied his size. The animals shifted but didn't flee. "Though I've had other names in other times. I'm here because I was found in these ruins, living as I've always lived. Close to the earth, close to the old powers. The authorities decided I was dangerous. Mad, they said. A threat to public safety." "Are you?" Marcus asked, surprising himself with his own boldness. Iron John smiled, revealing strong white teeth. "That depends on what you consider dangerous. I harm no one who doesn't harm the land or its creatures. But I don't fit into their neat categories, their systems and forms and regulations. So yes to them. I suppose I am very dangerous indeed." Marcus studied the lock on the door, a heavy industrial padlock, the kind that required a specific key. How do you survive in here? Do they bring you food? Once a day, a city worker comes with supplies, Iron John said. He leaves them outside and goes. He's terrified of me. I can smell it. But he's kind enough, in his way. And the animals bring me what else I need, passing it through the bars. He gestured to a small pile of nuts, berries, and even a few fresh fish. Nature provides. If you know how to ask. They talked for over an hour. Marcus sitting on the fire escape, while Iron John paced his cage, like a wolf that remembered running free. The wild man spoke of the city as it had been decades ago, when the factory was still operational and the surrounding area was alive with workers and families. He spoke of the forest that had existed there centuries before, of the streams that still flowed underground, of the ley lines, ancient paths of energy that crisscrossed beneath the concrete. The modern world has forgotten so much, Iron John said, his voice tinged with sadness. You've built your towers and networks, but you've lost touch with the older magic. The magic that flows through earth and water, through blood and bone. Young people like you, especially, you live in screens and signals, never feeling the dirt under your feet or the wind in your face. That's not entirely fair, Marcus protested. Technology can be amazing. It connects people. It helps us learn and create and... I didn't say it was bad. Iron John interrupted. I said you've forgotten the balance. Technology is a tool, like fire or steel. But it's become your master instead of your servant. You've traded wildness for comfort, instinct for algorithm. Marcus thought about his life, the hours spent gaming, the virtual achievements that felt more real than actual accomplishments, the way he sometimes went days without really looking at the sky. Maybe you have a point, he admitted. As the afternoon faded toward evening, Marcus knew he should leave. But as he stood to go, something caught his eye, a glint of metal on the ground near the fire escape landing. He bent down and found a key, old and ornate, partially buried in accumulated dirt and rust. That's interesting, Iron John said from inside, his voice suddenly sharp with attention. That key has been waiting for someone. Waiting for the right person to find it. Marcus picked it up, feeling its weight in his palm. It was made of a dark metal, with an elaborate head shaped like a wolf's profile. What does it open? Why don't you find out? Iron John's eyes gleamed in the fading light. Marcus approached the door to the cage, his heart pounding. This was crazy. This was dangerous. This was exactly the kind of impulsive decision that got people into serious trouble. The rational part of his mind screamed at him to drop the key and run, to forget this whole thing, to go back to his safe, predictable life. But a deeper part of him, a part that had been sleeping under layers of caution and conformity, urged him forward. The key slid into the lock as though it had been made for it. One turn, and the mechanism clicked open. Well then, Iron John said, pushing the door open slowly. It seems you've made your choice. The animals scattered as Iron John stepped out of his cage for the first time in 3 years. He stretched his arms wide, throwing his head back and breathing deeply of the free air. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. And in that light, Iron John seemed to grow larger, more luminous, as though he were absorbing power from the very atmosphere. "Thank you, Marcus Chen," Iron John said. And Marcus realized he'd never told the man his name. "You've freed me, but more importantly, you've freed yourself. The question now is, what will you do with that freedom?" "I don't understand," Marcus said, though part of him did, in a way that went beyond words. "You will," Iron John promised. "But first, you need to come with me. You've opened a door that can't be closed. You've taken a step onto a path that will change everything you think you know about this city, this world, and yourself. Are you brave enough to continue?" Marcus looked back toward the fence, toward the city beyond, toward his ordinary life. Then, he looked at Iron John, at the wild man who seemed to contain multitudes of mystery and possibility. "Yes," Marcus heard himself say. "I'm ready." Iron John grinned. "No, you're not. But you will be." Part 2? The hidden forest. They didn't go far. Not in terms of distance, anyway. Iron John led Marcus down from the factory ruins and into what appeared to be a small city park that Marcus had passed 100 times without really seeing it. Thornwood Park, the faded sign read. A neglected strip of green between the industrial zone and a residential neighborhood. Nothing special. Nothing magical. Except everything about it was different when you entered with Iron John. "The world is layered," Iron John explained as they walked beneath oak trees that seemed older than the city itself. "What most people see is just the surface, the modern layer, the concrete and steel. But underneath, the old layers remain. The earth remembers everything. The forests that were here before the factories. The rivers before the pipes. The spirits before the streetlights." As he spoke, the air around them began to shimmer. Marcus blinked, thinking it was a trick of the twilight, but the shimmer intensified. Colors grew richer. Sounds became clearer. He could hear water running somewhere nearby, though he knew there was no stream in Thornwood Park. He could smell flowers blooming, though it was late October, and nothing should be in bloom. "What's happening?" Marcus asked, his voice barely a whisper. "You're learning to see," Iron John said simply. "The key you found, it didn't just open my cage. It opened your eyes. Welcome to the real Thornwood, Marcus. Welcome to the place between worlds." They rounded a bend in the path, and Marcus stopped dead. The small city park had transformed into a vast forest. The trees towered overhead, their branches forming a canopy that glittered with what looked like stars, even though night hadn't fully fallen. Bioluminescent moss covered the bark, pulsing gently with an inner light. The stream he'd heard was now visible, flowing crystal, clear over stones that hummed with a low, musical tone. And there were creatures. A fox. Not the ordinary red fox that had been in Iron John's cage, but something larger and more luminous. with eyes that held human intelligence, padded out of the undergrowth, and sat at Iron John's feet. Birds that Marcus couldn't name swooped overhead, leaving trails of colored light in their wake. In the shadows between trees, he caught glimpses of larger shapes, some walking on 4 legs, others on 2, all watching with curious, knowing eyes. "This is impossible," Marcus breathed. "Only if you believe in the possible," a voice said from above. Marcus looked up to see a crow perched on a low branch. Its feathers were black as midnight, but its eyes were golden. And it had definitely just spoken. "Did that bird?" "I am not that bird," the crow said indignantly. "I am Munin, keeper of memory, servant of the old ways, an occasional advisor to those foolish enough to free imprisoned wild men." Iron John chuckled. "Marcus, you'll find that in this realm, many creatures have found their voices. The old magic runs strong here, in the places the modern world has forgotten." Over the next hours, or maybe it was days, time seemed to flow differently in the enchanted forest. Iron John began Marcus's education. They walked paths that wound through impossible geography, where a few steps could take you from oak forest to pine grove to a meadow filled with flowers that sang when the wind touched them. Iron John taught Marcus to read the signs of the forest, how to tell which mushrooms were safe and which were gateways to other realms, how to ask permission before taking from the land, how to move quietly enough that the shy creatures would reveal themselves. The modern world teaches you to consume without asking, Iron John said, as they sat beside the singing stream. "Take what you want when you want it. Click buy, consume. But the old way is different. Everything is alive. Everything is connected. You must learn to ask, to listen, to give back." Marcus found himself learning at a pace that seemed impossible. His mind, trained by years of gaming and puzzle solving, adapted quickly to the new rules. But Iron John constantly pushed him beyond intellectual understanding. "Don't think," Iron John barked when Marcus tried to analyze the pattern of lines they were following. "Feel. The energy flows through you as much as through the earth. Trust your instincts, not your algorithms." It was harder than any game Marcus had ever played, because there was no manual, no walkthrough, no way to pause and research the optimal strategy. He had to learn to trust himself in a way he never had before. One evening, as they made camp in a grove of birch trees that seemed to glow from within, Marcus asked the question that had been building in his mind. "Why me? Why did I find the key? Why did you agree to teach me?" Iron John poked at the fire he'd started without matches or lighter, using only flint and wood and knowledge. "The key finds who it needs to find. And you found it because some part of you was ready. Ready to step off the path that had been laid out for you. Ready to question the world you'd been told was the only real one. As for teaching you," he looked at Marcus with those storm gray eyes, "every generation needs guides. People who can walk between the old world and the new, who can speak both languages. You have potential, Marcus Chen. You're clever and curious. But more than that, You're dissatisfied. I can see it in you. The hunger for something more. Something real? I thought my life was fine, Marcus said quietly. I had my games, my friends online, my plans for college. Was it enough? Marcus thought about the hours he'd spent in front of screens, the achievements that felt hollow even as he earned them, the way he sometimes felt like he was watching his own life from a distance instead of living it. No, he admitted. It wasn't. Then this is where you need to be, Iron John said. At least for now. At least until you learn what you need to learn. Over the following weeks, Marcus discovered that the enchanted forest was far more than it first appeared. Iron John introduced him to its inhabitants, both ordinary and extraordinary. There was Sage, a gray wolf who spoke in riddles and served as a guide to the deeper parts of the forest. There was Willow, a woman who seemed to be made partly of tree bark and partly of mist, who taught Marcus which plants could heal and which could harm. There were the twins, Ash and Ember, who might have been human once but now flickered between corporeal and flame, laughing as they led Marcus on wild chases through the underbrush. But the forest wasn't all wonder and beauty. Iron John made sure Marcus understood that. There are dangers here, the wild man warned. The old magic doesn't distinguish between good intentions and bad. There are predators, both animal and spirit. There are places where the barriers between worlds grow thin, and things slip through that shouldn't. You must learn to defend yourself, to trust your instincts, to know when to fight and when to run. The lessons became harder. Iron John would wake Marcus before dawn and send him into the forest alone, with only a task to complete. Find a specific plant, track an animal to its den, navigate by the stars to a particular landmark. Marcus learned to move quietly, to read the subtle signs of danger, to use all his senses instead of relying on sight alone. One night, Iron John handed Marcus a wooden staff. Tomorrow, you face your first real test. There's a creature that's been threatening the eastern edge of the forest. A shadow. Cat. Drawn here from somewhere else by the weakening barriers. It's been hunting the smaller animals, disrupting the balance. You need to drive it back to where it belongs. Marcus felt his stomach drop. You want me to fight it? I want you to face it, Iron John corrected. Fighting is only one option. You'll need to decide in the moment what's required. But you won't have me there to guide you. This test is yours alone. That night, Marcus barely slept. He lay in the shelter Iron John had taught him to build, listening to the night sounds of the forest, wondering if he was really ready for this. Part of him wanted to run, to find his way back to the ordinary world and forget all of this. But a deeper part, the part that had awakened when he freed Iron John, knew that running was no longer an option. He'd stepped onto this path, and the only way forward was through. Part 3. The first trial dawn came cold and gray, with mist rising from the forest floor like the breath of sleeping giants. Marcus stood at the edge of the eastern territory, staff in hand, trying to calm his racing heart. Iron John had walked him to the boundary, and then simply nodded. Remember, the wild man had said, trust your instincts. Listen to what the forest tells you. And know that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's action despite fear. Now Marcus was alone, following the trail of disturbance that marked the shadow cat's passage. Broken branches, claw marks on tree trunks, and something else. A feeling in the air, a wrongness that made his skin prickle. The trail led deeper into a part of the forest Marcus hadn't explored before, where the trees grew so thick that little sunlight penetrated, and the undergrowth was sparse and sickly. He moved carefully, trying to remember everything Iron John had taught him about tracking, about staying alert, about reading the environment. A sound froze him in place, a low growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Marcus gripped his staff tighter, spinning slowly, trying to locate the source. Then he saw it. The shadow cat emerged from the darkness between two massive oaks, and Marcus understood immediately why it was called that. It wasn't black exactly. It was shadow itself. A three-dimensional piece of darkness that had taken the shape of a massive feline predator. Its eyes glowed yellow, the only point of color in its impossible form. It was easily the size of a tiger, with fangs that looked like shards of night. Every instinct screamed at Marcus to run. His hands shook on the staff. His breath came in short gasps. But underneath the fear, something else stirred. The part of him that had spent years mastering complex games, that had learned Iron John's lessons, that had begun to trust the wild intuition growing within him. The shadow cat circled him slowly, and Marcus forced himself to stand still, to breathe, to observe. It was wounded. He could see that now. A patch on its flank where the shadow seemed thinner, almost transparent. It was in pain, which made it more dangerous, but also more desperate. You don't belong here, Marcus said aloud, surprising himself. His voice was steadier than he felt. This isn't your hunting ground. The shadow cat paused, its yellow eyes fixing on him with an intelligence that was distinctly not animal. Then, impossibly, it spoke. Its voice was like wind through a graveyard, hollow and cold. The boy speaks, it said. The boy who smells of the modern world but walks with the old man. What do you know of belonging, little cub? I know you're hurting the forest, Marcus replied, finding his footing now. I know you're not meant to be here. And I know you're injured. The shadow cat's tail lashed. Injured by those who hunted me from my own realm. The barriers are weak, and I slipped through, seeking safety. But there is no safety anywhere, it seems. Marcus thought fast. This wasn't just a mindless beast. It was a refugee. Driven here by desperation. Fighting it wouldn't solve anything. But he couldn't let it continue disrupting the forest either. What if I could help you get home? Marcus asked. What if there was a way to heal the barrier and send you back where you belong? The shadow cat laughed, a sound like autumn leaves scattering. Bold words from a cub who barely knows what he is. You think you have such power? I think I know someone who does, Marcus said, thinking of Iron John. But you'd have to trust me. You'd have to stop hunting here and come with me." For a long moment, the shadow cat stared at him. Marcus could feel it weighing his words, measuring his intent. Then, slowly, it sat down, its tail curling around its body. "You remind me of someone," the shadow cat said. "Long ago in my world, there was a cub like you. Brave and foolish in equal measure. Very well, boy. I will trust you. But if you betray that trust, I won't," Marcus said firmly. Getting back to Iron John's camp, with a shadow cat the size of a tiger following him, was one of the stranger experiences of Marcus's life. The creature moved silently through the forest, occasionally stopping to test the air or watch the other animals scatter in terror. Marcus kept up a steady stream of conversation, partly to keep the cat calm and partly to keep himself from panicking at what he just promised. When they emerged into the clearing where Iron John waited, the wild man's eyebrows rose in surprise. Perhaps the first time Marcus had seen him genuinely caught off guard. "Well," Iron John said slowly, "this is not how I expected this trial to go." "I was injured," Marcus explained quickly, "fleeing hunters from another realm. I hoped, you might be able to help." Iron John studied the shadow cat, then looked at Marcus with something that might have been approval. "You chose compassion over combat. Interesting. Most would have attacked first. Most would have run." The shadow cat interjected dryly. Over the next hour, Iron John examined the wounded creature and questioned it about the barrier breach. Marcus watched as the wild man worked, using a combination of herbs, words in a language Marcus didn't recognize, and what looked like pure force of will to heal the shadow cat's injury. Then Iron John led them both to a place Marcus had never seen before, a clearing where the air itself seemed to shimmer with iridescent light. "This is a thin place," Iron John explained, "where the walls between realms are naturally weak. It's probably how you crossed over," he said to the shadow cat. "And it's how you'll get home." The wild man began to work, his hands tracing patterns in the air that left glowing trails behind them. Marcus could feel energy building, like static before a thunderstorm. The shimmer in the air intensified, and suddenly Marcus could see through it to another forest, darker and stranger than this one, where purple flowers bloomed on black trees and the sky was a deep indigo. "Home," the shadow cat breathed. It turned to Marcus, and for a moment, its fierce yellow eyes softened. "You kept your word, cub. Remember this, sometimes the bravest thing is not to fight, but to understand. You will go far if you survive long enough." Then it leaped through the portal, and the shimmer sealed behind it. Marcus stood there, staff still in hand, trying to process what had just happened. Iron John clapped him on the shoulder, a gesture of approval that made Marcus's heart swell with pride. "You passed your first trial," the wild man said. "Not in the way I expected, but perhaps in a better way. You showed judgment, compassion, and courage. But more than that, you showed the ability to see beyond the obvious solution. These are the qualities you'll need for what comes next." "What comes next?" Marcus asked, though part of him already knew the answer. Iron John smiled. More trials. Harder tests. The path to maturity is not a straight line, boy. It's a spiral that leads you deeper into yourself with each turn. But tonight, we celebrate. You've earned it. That night, the forest came alive with celebration. Creatures emerged from every corner of the woods. Some Marcus recognized, others completely new to him. There was music from instruments he couldn't see, food that appeared on wooden platters, and a fire that burned in colors Marcus didn't have names for. He danced with beings that might have been human once, listened to stories told by animals, and felt more alive, more present, more real than he ever had in his 17 years. But in a quiet moment, as he sat beside the fire watching the flames dance, Iron John sat down next to him with a serious expression. "You need to understand something," the wild man said. "This path you're walking, it changes you. You can't go back to being who you were before. The old world and the new. The magical and the mundane. You'll be caught between them now. It's not always an easy place to stand." "I know," Marcus said, though he wasn't sure he really understood the full weight of it yet. "Do you?" Iron John challenged. "You haven't been home in weeks. Your parents must be frantic. Your friends must think you've vanished. The modern world doesn't just pause while you go on a mystical journey." Marcus felt a pang of guilt. In the timeless realm of the enchanted forest, he'd almost forgotten about his other life. How long has it been? In the outside world, 3 days. Time moves differently here, but it still moves. You'll need to learn to balance both worlds, Marcus. That's part of the lesson, too. The celebration continued around them, but Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. He was being given gifts. Knowledge, power, connection to something ancient and wild. But gifts always came with a price. "What if I can't balance it?" Marcus asked quietly. "What if I have to choose?" Iron John was silent for a long moment, staring into the fire. "Then you'll choose," he said finally. "But the goal is to integrate, not separate. To bring the wild wisdom into the modern world, and the modern creativity into the wild. That's what the next generation needs. People who can bridge the gap." As the fire burned low and the creatures of the forest drifted away to their homes, Marcus lay down on the soft moss beside the flames and thought about what lay ahead. He'd passed one trial, but he could feel that it was just the beginning. The real challenges were still to come. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a small voice whispered that he wasn't quite ready for what Iron John had planned for him next. Part 4. The Golden Gift. The morning after the celebration, Iron John led Marcus to a part of the forest Marcus had never seen before. A grove where the trees grew in a perfect circle, and the ground was covered with soft, silver moss that glowed gently in the filtered sunlight. In the center of the grove stood a stone pedestal, ancient and weathered, covered in symbols that seemed to shift when Marcus looked at them directly. "This is a place of power," Iron John said, his voice taking on a formal tone. a place where gifts are given and oaths are made. You've proven yourself worthy of the first real gift of this path. From a leather bag he carried, Iron John withdrew an object that made Marcus's breath catch. It looked like a VR headset, but unlike any Marcus had ever seen. Where commercial headsets were plastic and utilitarian, this one was crafted from what appeared to be gold and crystal, with intricate engravings running along its surface. The lenses gleamed with an inner light, and when Iron John held it up, Marcus could see tiny stars swirling within the crystal. "This," Iron John said, "is a bridge between imagination and reality. Your generation spends so much time in virtual worlds, seeking escape from the mundane. But what if you could access something deeper? What if you could tap into the realms of pure creativity, pure potential?" He handed the headset to Marcus, who took it with trembling hands. It was warm to the touch and lighter than it looked. The moment his fingers made contact with it, he felt a tingling sensation run up his arms, like electricity made of starlight. "Put it on," Iron John instructed. Marcus lifted the golden headset and settled it over his eyes. For a moment, there was only darkness. Then the world exploded into light. He was standing in a space that defied description. It wasn't a place. Exactly. It was possibility itself. Around him floated islands of different realities, each one a complete world unto itself. He could see a medieval kingdom floating to his left, complete with castles and dragons and knights in shining armor. To his right was a futuristic city of crystal and light, with vehicles that moved through the air like fish through water. Above him, a vast library stretched into infinity, its shelves containing every story ever told and every story yet to be written. "This is the realm of potential." Iron John's voice echoed around him, though Marcus couldn't see the wild man. Every dream, every vision, every creative spark that has ever existed or will exist, they all begin here. With this headset, you can explore these realms, learn from them, even shape them. It is your inner power made manifest. Your golden ball, as the old stories call it. Your potential for growth and transformation. Marcus reached out toward the medieval kingdom. And suddenly he was there, standing on a stone bridge over a river of liquid starlight. A dragon circled overhead. But instead of fear, Marcus felt wonder. He could sense that this dragon was part of his own imagination, brought to life by the realm itself. He spent what felt like hours exploring. He walked through the futuristic city and understood technologies that didn't exist yet. He entered the infinite library and found books that taught him everything from advanced mathematics to ancient magic. He discovered a workshop where he could craft anything he imagined into being. Swords that sang, armor made of moonlight, vehicles that could travel between worlds. But more than that, he found parts of himself he'd never fully acknowledged. In one realm, he confronted his fears, which took the form of shadow creatures, not unlike the shadow cat he'd faced in the forest. In another, he met his potential selves. The Marcus he could become if he chose different paths. each one showing him possibilities and consequences. When he finally removed the headset, he found himself back in the grove, with Iron John watching him carefully. The sun had moved significantly across the sky. "How long was I in there?" Marcus asked. "An hour in this world," Iron John replied. Time flows differently in the realms of potential. But more importantly, what did you learn? Marcus tried to find words for the experience. "It's incredible. It's like every game I've ever played, every story I've ever read, every dream I've ever had, all of it real and accessible. I could learn anything, create anything." "Yes," Iron John said, and his tone carried a warning. "You could. But there are rules, Marcus. Important ones. Listen carefully." The wild man sat down on the moss and gestured for Marcus to join him. The golden headset is a tool of immense power. It can help you grow, teach you things you couldn't learn any other way, show you truths about yourself and the world. But it can also be a trap. You must never use it for more than 1 hour in any day. You must never use it to escape your responsibilities in this world. And most importantly, you must never use it without first completing your real-world tasks and obligations. "Why?" Marcus asked. "If it's so powerful, why limit it?" "Because power without discipline is corruption," Iron John said firmly. "Because the realms of potential are intoxicating, and it's easy to get lost in them. Because you must learn to balance the magical and the mundane, the imagined and the real. The headset is a gift, but it's also a test. Can you use great power responsibly? Can you resist the temptation to lose yourself in fantasy when reality calls?" Marcus nodded, understanding the weight of what he was being given. "I'll follow the rules." "I know you believe that now," Iron John said, and there was sadness in his voice. "But belief and action are different things. Every seeker who has been given this gift has broken these rules at least once. It's part of the learning process. But the consequences are real, Marcus. Remember that." For the next several weeks, Marcus threw himself into mastering both worlds. During the day, he continued his training with Iron John, learning to read the ley lines that ran beneath the city, to communicate with the animals and spirits of the forest, to harness the wild magic that flowed through all living things. In the evening, for exactly 1 hour, he would put on the golden headset and explore the realms of potential, bringing back knowledge and insights that helped him in his physical training. He learned to see the connections between things, how the mathematical patterns in the futuristic city matched the natural patterns in the forest, how the stories in the infinite library echoed the real challenges he faced, how his inner fears and strengths manifested in both realms. The headset became his most prized possession, a tool that unlocked parts of his mind and heart he'd never known existed. But with the gift came temptation. There were days when the real world felt harder than usual, when Iron John's lessons seemed tedious compared to the wonders of the realms of potential. Marcus would find himself thinking about the headset while he was supposed to be tracking animals or meditating by the stream. He'd catch himself calculating how he could sneak in an extra session. Just a few more minutes, without Iron John noticing. One evening, after a particularly frustrating day, where nothing seemed to go right, he'd gotten lost tracking a deer. He'd misidentified a poisonous plant. He'd failed to sense an approaching storm. Marcus returned to his shelter exhausted and discouraged. Iron John had gone to attend to something in another part of the forest, leaving Marcus alone for the night. The golden headset sat on a wooden stand Iron John had made for it, gleaming in the firelight. Marcus had already used his allotted hour that day, exploring a realm where he'd been learning advanced combat techniques. But as he sat there, tired and frustrated, the temptation whispered to him. Just a few more minutes. Just to unwind. Just to feel successful at something after such a difficult day. What harm could it do? Marcus knew he shouldn't. Iron John's warning echoed in his mind. But the day had been so hard, and the headset was right there. And Iron John wouldn't even know. He put it on. The realms of potential welcomed him, as they always did, with a rush of possibility and wonder. Marcus told himself he'd only stay for a few minutes, just long enough to shake off the day's failures. He entered a realm where he was a master warrior, where every move he made was perfect, where enemies fell before him like wheat before a scythe. It felt good to be competent, to be powerful, to succeed. A few minutes became an hour became 2. In the realms of potential, Marcus lost track of time as he moved from one fantasy to another, each one feeding his ego, each one making the real world seem more and more distant and irrelevant. He was in the middle of conquering a dragon. A far more impressive dragon than the one from the Shadow Realm. When something went wrong, the realm flickered. The dragon froze mid-flight. And suddenly Marcus felt a pulling sensation, as though something was trying to suck him deeper into the headset. Panic seized him. He reached up to pull the headset off, but his hands wouldn't move. He tried to blink himself back to reality, but nothing happened. He was stuck, suspended in a frozen fantasy, unable to leave. Then he heard a voice, cold and mocking, that wasn't Iron John's and wasn't his own. "Greedy little boy," the voice said. "The gift was given with rules, but you thought yourself above them. Now you'll learn what happens when you try to take more than you've earned." The frozen realm around Marcus began to crack like a mirror. Through the cracks he could see darkness. Not the darkness of night, but of absolute emptiness. The void between worlds. The place where lost things went. "No," Marcus whispered, finding his voice. "Please, I'm sorry. I made a mistake. Mistakes have consequences," the voice replied. "You wanted to escape reality. Very well. Perhaps you should stay here permanently." The realm shattered completely, and Marcus fell into darkness. Part 5. Lost and found, Marcus tumbled through the void, unable to tell up from down. Unable to see or hear or feel anything except the terrible sensation of falling. Time lost all meaning. He might have been falling for seconds or centuries. There was no way to know. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the falling stopped. Marcus found himself lying on cold stone in absolute darkness. His hands scrambled for the headset. And this time, when he reached up, he could feel it. With a desperate motion, he tore it from his head. But he was still in darkness. Slowly, his eyes began to adjust. He was in some kind of cavern, lit only by a faint bioluminescent glow from moss on the walls. The golden headset lay beside him, but its lenses were dark and lifeless. When he picked it up, it felt cold and heavy, devoid of the warmth and light it had possessed before. "Iron John," Marcus called out, his voice echoing in the emptiness. "Can anyone hear me?" Only his echo answered. Marcus stood on shaky legs and began to explore. The cavern was vast, with tunnels leading off in multiple directions. He had no idea where he was or how to get back. The only thing he knew for certain was that he'd broken the rules. And now he was paying the price. He chose a tunnel at random and began to walk, trailing one hand along the wall to keep his bearings. As he moved deeper into the underground labyrinth, he began to see signs of something. Scratches on the walls that might have been writing in a language he didn't know. Bones scattered on the ground. Small animals, nothing human, but still unsettling. And occasionally, a sound in the distance that might have been water, or wind, or something breathing. Hours passed. Or maybe days. Marcus couldn't tell. He had no food, no water, no supplies of any kind. The golden headset, his prized possession, hung uselessly from his hand. He tried putting it on several times, hoping to access the realms of potential again, but it remained dark and cold. As he walked, Marcus had plenty of time to think about his mistake. He'd been given a gift, a tool of incredible power, with clear rules attached. And at the first real test of his discipline, he'd failed. He'd let his ego and his desire for escape override his judgment. He'd thought he was above the rules, that he could handle just a little more without consequences. Now he was lost in what felt like the underworld itself, paying for his arrogance. The tunnel he was following began to slope downward, and Marcus heard the sound of running water growing louder. He emerged into a larger cavern, where an underground river flowed, its water black as ink, but moving with purpose. On the bank of the river sat a figure, an old woman with skin like tree bark and hair like Spanish moss. She was stirring something in a pot that hung over a fire that produced no smoke. "Well, well," the old woman said without looking up. Another fool who thought himself wise. "Come sit. You look like you could use some soup." Marcus approached cautiously. After everything that had happened, he wasn't sure he could trust anyone. But the smell of the soup made his empty stomach growl, and the old woman seemed more sad than threatening. "Who are you?" Marcus asked. "I'm the one who catches the fallen," she replied, ladling soup into a wooden bowl and offering it to him. The crone of the deep places. When seekers break the rules and fall from grace, this is where they end up. Some stay forever. Some find their way out. Which will you be, I wonder? Marcus took the bowl and sipped the soup. It was surprisingly good. Rich with vegetables and herbs, he couldn't identify. How do I get out? The same way you got in, the crone said. Through honesty. Through facing what you've done. Through earning your way back. She finally looked at him, and her eyes were ancient and knowing. You broke faith with yourself and with your teacher. You wanted the easy path, the quick reward. Now you must take the hard path if you want to return. What's the hard path? Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Down, the crone said, gesturing to the river. Follow the water to its source. Face what lives in the deepest places. Reclaim what you've lost. Only then will the way up reveal itself. Marcus looked at the river flowing into darkness. What lives in the deepest places? The crone smiled, showing teeth that might have been carved from stone. Why? Yourself, of course. All your fears, all your failures. All the parts of yourself you try to hide behind achievements and fantasies. The headset showed you potential, but you must face your reality before you can access potential again. She handed him a small lantern that glowed with the same bioluminescent light as the moss. This will guide you partway. The rest of the journey must be made in darkness. But remember, darkness is not the same as blindness. Sometimes we see most clearly when we can't rely on our eyes. Marcus wanted to ask more questions, but the crone had already turned back to her pot, humming a tune that was at once beautiful and unsettling. Taking the lantern and leaving the golden headset with the old woman for safekeeping, Marcus stepped into the shallow water at the river's edge and began to wade upstream, against the current. The journey was as difficult as anything Marcus had ever done. The water grew deeper and faster as he progressed, until he was swimming more than wading. The lantern's light revealed caverns of impossible beauty, crystal formations that sang when the water touched them, underground waterfalls that fell upward instead of down, pools where blind fish swam in patterns that looked like constellations. But beauty wasn't all he encountered. There were places where the caverns narrowed so much he had to squeeze through gaps in the rock, his heart pounding with claustrophobia. There were chambers where the water churned with currents that threatened to pull him under. And always, in the darkness beyond his lantern's light, he sensed something watching, waiting. After what might have been hours or days, the lantern began to flicker. Marcus had just emerged into a vast underground lake when the light finally went out, leaving him in absolute darkness. Okay, Marcus said aloud, his voice echoing across the invisible water. Darkness is not blindness. What am I supposed to see here? As if in answer, the water around him began to glow. But this wasn't the gentle bioluminescence of the moss or the lantern. This was a harsh, revealing light that showed Marcus his own reflection in the water. But not as he was now. The reflection showed him as he'd been when he first put on the headset against Iron John's rules self. Satisfied, arrogant, convinced he knew better. Look at yourself, a voice said from the darkness. It was his own voice, but older, harder. Look at what you've become. So desperate to escape reality that you'll break any rule, betray any trust. Marcus wanted to look away, but he couldn't. Other reflections appeared in the water around him, each one showing a different failure, a different moment of weakness. There was Marcus ignoring his parents' calls while he played games for hours. Marcus lying to friends about why he couldn't hang out. Marcus choosing the easy path again and again, rationalizing every shortcut, every compromise. This isn't fair, Marcus protested. I'm not a bad person. I made one mistake. One mistake. The voice laughed. You've been making the same mistake your whole life. Choosing comfort over challenge. Choosing fantasy over reality. The headset was just the latest temptation. And you failed the test, just like you failed all the others. Marcus felt tears running down his face. The reflections weren't lying. He had spent years avoiding real challenges, losing himself in virtual worlds because they were easier than dealing with the messy complexity of real life. Even his friendship with Iron John had started as a thrill, an adventure, a game. He'd never fully committed to the harder work of actual transformation. You're right, Marcus said quietly. I've been running away. From expectations, from responsibility, from myself. I thought the headset would make me powerful, but all it did was give me a new place to hide. The moment he spoke those words, the harsh light in the water began to soften. The reflections faded, replaced by a single image, Marcus as he could be. Not perfect, not a hero from a fantasy, but real. Flawed and struggling, and honest and brave, in the way that mattered. So what do I do now? Marcus asked the darkness. Now you choose? The voice replied, but it was gentler now. More like his own true voice than the harsh judge. You can stay here. Safe in the dark where no one expects anything of you. Or you can swim to the source, face what's there, and earn your way back to the world. But understand, if you go back, you can't use the headset anymore. That gift is gone. You broke the rules. And consequences are real. The thought of losing the headset forever made Marcus's heart ache. It had been amazing. The access to all those realms, all that potential. But as he floated in the dark water, he realized something important. The headset hadn't made him grow. If anything, it had become another form of escapism. Another way to avoid doing the hard work of real transformation. Iron John had given him the headset as a test, not a crutch, and Marcus had failed the test. I'll go forward, Marcus said. I'll face whatever's at the source. I'll earn my way back. The water beneath him began to move, carrying him forward through the darkness. Marcus swam with the current now, no longer fighting it, trusting it to take him where he needed to go. The source of the underground river was a spring that bubbled up from the earth itself. In a chamber so deep that Marcus could feel the weight of the entire city pressing down above him. And there, coiled around the spring, was a serpent. It was massive, easily the size of a bus, with scales that glittered like gemstones in the faint light that emanated from the spring itself. Its eyes were golden and ancient, and when it spoke, Marcus felt the words in his bones. You have come to the source, the serpent said. to the place where all things begin and end. What do you seek here? Child of the surface world. Marcus faced the serpent, his fear present but no longer controlling him. I seek to make amends for my mistakes, to earn back what I lost, to find my way home. And what have you learned in your journey through the deep places? Marcus thought about everything he'd experienced since falling into the void. I've learned that gifts come with responsibilities, that power without discipline is corruption, that I've been running from challenges my whole life, and that needs to change. The serpent's tongue flickered out, tasting the air. Truth. But incomplete truth. What else? Marcus dug deeper past the easy answers. I've learned that I'm not as strong as I thought I was, that I need help. That Iron John wasn't just teaching me magic. He was teaching me how to be a better person, and I wasn't ready to hear it. Better, the serpent said. And, Marcus felt tears coming again, but he didn't try to stop them. And I'm scared. I'm scared that even if I get back, I'll make the same mistakes again. I'm scared that losing the headset means losing my chance to be special, to be powerful. I'm scared that without it, I'm just ordinary again. The serpent began to uncoil from the spring, its massive body moving with liquid grace. Now you speak the deepest truth, the fear of being ordinary, the desire to be special. These are the desires that led you to free me from my cage. Marcus stepped back, confused. Free you? I don't understand. Don't you? The serpent's form began to shimmer and change. Scales became skin. Reptilian features became human. In moments, Iron John stood before him, though something in his eyes remained serpentine and ancient. I am the guardian of the source, the teacher who tests those who seek the deeper wisdom. When you freed me from that cage in the factory, you thought you were liberating a prisoner. But the cage was the test, and the key was the question. Would you have the courage to step into the unknown? Marcus's mind reeled. You've been testing me this whole time. Every teacher tests their students. Iron John replied, his form stabilizing back into the wild man Marcus knew. Every gift is a test. Every challenge is a question. You freed me, and in return, I offered to teach you. But the real teaching wasn't in the forest magic, or the ley lines, or even the golden headset. It was in discovering who you are when your crutches are taken away. So the headset was meant to be taken from me. Not taken, relinquished. You were meant to realize its limitations yourself, to choose real growth over virtual power. But you weren't ready yet. So yes, you had to lose it. You had to fall into the depths and face yourself without any tools or tricks or escapes. Iron John moved closer, placing a hand on Marcus's shoulder. The question now is, having fallen, having learned, will you rise differently? Marcus looked up at his teacher, his mentor, this ancient being who had chosen to guide him. I want to do better. But I'm still scared. Good, Iron John said. Fear means you understand the weight of the choice. Come. It's time to go home. The spring began to glow brighter, and the water rose up in a column that surrounded both of them. Marcus felt himself being lifted, carried upward through the earth, through stone and soil and root, through the layers of the city above. He closed his eyes against the vertigo, and when he opened them again, he was standing in the enchanted forest, in the clearing where his shelter stood. It was morning. Dewdrops sparkled on the leaves. Birds sang their dawn chorus. Everything looked exactly as it had when he'd made his mistake. But Marcus was different. The headset, he asked. Iron John pulled it from his bag and handed it to Marcus. It was still beautiful, still gleaming with golden light. It's yours to keep. But you must choose. Will you use it as an escape? Or will you set it aside and commit to the harder path of real growth? Marcus held the headset, feeling its weight, remembering all the wonders it had shown him. Part of him wanted to keep it, to convince himself he could use it responsibly now that he'd learned his lesson. But he knew better. I need to set it aside, Marcus said. Maybe someday I'll be ready for it again. But right now, I need to learn to find magic in reality, not escape from reality into magic. Iron John nodded solemnly. A wise choice. The headset will be here, in the grove of power, waiting for the day when you've truly mastered yourself. But that day is not today. Together, they walked to the sacred grove and placed the golden headset on its stone pedestal. As soon as it left Marcus's hands, he felt both loss and relief. The pain of giving up something precious, and the freedom of no longer being tempted by it. What now? Marcus asked. Iron John smiled. Now. The real work begins. Part 6. The tests of the city over the following months. Iron John's teaching took on a new dimension. No longer did they stay exclusively in the enchanted forest. Instead, the wild man began to show Marcus how the magic and wisdom of the old world could be applied to the challenges of the modern one. The forest teaches you intuition and connection, Iron John explained as they stood on a rooftop overlooking the city at night. But you live in this world too. You must learn to navigate both. The lessons became practical and immediate. Iron John taught Marcus to sense the ley lines that ran beneath the streets. Ancient rivers of energy that connected parks and green spaces like a secret network underlying the city's grid. Marcus learned to read the flow of crowds the way he'd learned to read the forest, understanding the rhythms and patterns of human movement. He learned to spot the thin places in the urban landscape. Old churches built on sacred ground, forgotten cemeteries, street corners where three worlds intersected. But the real tests came in the form of actual challenges, problems that required both magical knowledge and modern savvy to solve. The first major trial began with a dream. Marcus woke one night in his shelter, gasping, with the echo of animal voices crying for help still ringing in his ears. When he told Iron John about it, the wild man's face grew grave. The dream is ascending, Iron John said. A call for help from creatures who can't speak for themselves. Follow where it leads. The trail took Marcus deep into the city's underground, into the abandoned subway tunnels that networked beneath the streets like veins. Armed with nothing but a flashlight and his growing intuition, Marcus navigated the dark passages, following the sense of wrongness that grew stronger with each step. He found them in a sealed section of the Old Blue Line, a colony of magical creatures that Marcus had thought only existed in the enchanted forest. There were foxes that glowed faintly in the dark, rabbits with antlers like tiny deer, and birds whose wings left trails of light when they moved. They were trapped behind a collapsed section of tunnel, unable to reach the surface, slowly dying from lack of food and fresh air. But the collapse wasn't natural. As Marcus examined the debris, he found evidence of deliberate sabotage, explosive charges, carefully placed. Someone had sealed these creatures down here on purpose. Using a combination of Iron John's lessons and his own technical knowledge, Marcus began to devise a plan. He couldn't just blast through the collapsed tunnel. That might bring down more of the structure and hurt the creatures he was trying to save. Instead, he spent days mapping the tunnel system on his phone, finding alternative routes, weak points in the collapse where a smaller breach could be made. He recruited help from the few friends he'd maintained contact with, specifically Maya, a girl from his coding club who asked questions but didn't pry when he gave vague answers. Together, they hacked into the city's utility systems to identify safe spots where water and power lines wouldn't be damaged by their work. The actual rescue took an entire night. Marcus and Maya worked in shifts, carefully removing debris piece by piece, creating a passage just large enough for the magical creatures to squeeze through. When the first fox emerged into the larger tunnel and nuzzled against Marcus's hand, leaving a trail of glowing light, Maya's eyes went wide. What is that?" she breathed. "Something that needs to exist in secret." Marcus replied carefully. "Can you help me get them to safety without asking too many questions?" Maya looked at him for a long moment, and Marcus could see her weighing curiosity against trust. Finally, she nodded. "Okay. But you owe me an explanation someday. A real one." They guided the creatures through the tunnels to an access point that opened into one of the city's larger parks. A place where the boundary between mundane and magical was thin enough that the creatures could slip back into the enchanted realm. As the last of them disappeared into the shadows between trees, Marcus felt a surge of accomplishment, unlike anything he'd experienced in the realms of potential. This was real. These were actual living beings he'd saved, not fantasy achievements. But the trial wasn't over. The next day, Marcus began investigating who had trapped the creatures in the first place. The trail led him into uncomfortable territory. A development company that wanted to expand the subway system, bulldozing one of the city's oldest parks to do it. The same park where the creatures had been accessing the underground tunnels. The company was owned by Richard Chen, a distant cousin of Marcus's father, wealthy and powerful, and completely indifferent to environmental concerns. Marcus spent weeks gathering evidence of the company's illegal activities. Not just the trapping of magical creatures, which he couldn't exactly report to normal authorities, but violations of environmental laws, bribery, and fraudulent permits. This required skills Marcus had developed in both worlds. He used Iron John's teaching to sense the lies and corruption that permeated the company's dealings. He used his technical skills to hack into email servers and recover deleted files. He used his growing network of contacts, both human and otherwise, to piece together a picture of systemic wrongdoing. When he had enough evidence, Marcus faced a choice. He could leak it all anonymously, staying safe in the shadows. Or he could confront Richard Chen directly, standing up for what he believed in even if it caused family drama and put a target on his back. Marcus chose confrontation. The meeting took place in Richard Chen's office, a gleaming space on the 40th floor of a downtown tower. Marcus, accompanied by Maya and Iron John, who had disguised himself in a suit that made him look only slightly less wild, presented their evidence. Richard Chen listened with increasing anger, his face reddening as they detailed his crimes. "You have no idea what you're messing with, boy," Richard snarled when they finished. "I could destroy you. Destroy your family. You could try?" Marcus replied, keeping his voice steady despite his pounding heart. "But we've already sent copies of this evidence to environmental groups, journalists, and the district attorney. You can destroy me, but you can't destroy the truth. And you'd betray family for what? Some trees. Some animals." Richard's contempt was palpable. Marcus thought about the glowing foxes, the antlered rabbits, the birds of light. He thought about the ancient park that held a gateway between worlds. He thought about all the people who used that park daily, finding peace in its green spaces without knowing about the magic it contained. "I'd betray corruption for what's right," Marcus said, "even if it's family." The confrontation ended with threats and rage from Richard Chen, but the damage was done. Within weeks, the development project was suspended pending investigation. The park remained safe. And Marcus learned a crucial lesson about courage. That sometimes standing up for what you believe in means standing against people who have power over you. But there were consequences. Marcus's parents were furious when they learned he'd been investigating his cousin. His extended family accused him of disloyalty. Even some of his friends couldn't understand why he'd risked so much for just a park. Iron John found him one night sitting alone in the forest, processing the fallout. "The path of integrity is often lonely," the wild man said, settling down beside him. "People who benefit from the way things are will always resist change. But you did the right thing, Marcus. You protected those who couldn't protect themselves. It doesn't feel like victory," Marcus admitted. "It feels like I lost something." "You did," Iron John agreed. "You lost the comfort of fitting in, of not making waves. But you gained something more valuable. The knowledge that you can stand up for your principles, even when it costs you. That's maturity, Marcus. That's real strength." The second major trial came from an unexpected direction. Marcus's own school. He'd been back to the mundane world regularly now, balancing his education in both realms. But one day he noticed something strange. Several students seemed different, almost hollow, going through the motions of school, but with their spirits dimmed. When he asked Iron John about it, the wild man frowned. "Show me." Together they observed the school from a distance, and Iron John's face grew dark. "There's a binding on them. Someone has been stealing their vitality, their creative spark. This is old magic, Marcus." Dark magic. The investigation led Marcus into the world of urban occult practitioners. People who had learned fragments of real magic and were using it for selfish ends. He discovered that a teacher at his school, Mr. Graves, had been using a ritual to drain students' creativity and inspiration, feeding on it to fuel his own artistic career. This trial was harder than the last because Marcus couldn't rely on legal systems or public exposure. What Mr. Graves was doing was magical in nature, invisible to normal authorities. Marcus would have to confront him directly, using the skills Iron John had taught him. The confrontation took place in the school's art room after hours. Marcus had spent weeks preparing, learning protective wards and counter spells, gathering objects of power from the enchanted forest. When he confronted Mr. Graves, the teacher didn't even try to deny it. "They're children," Graves said dismissively. "They waste their creativity on video games and social media anyway. I'm using it for real art." "It's not yours to take," Marcus replied, his voice hard. "You're supposed to nurture their creativity, not steal it." What followed was Marcus's first real magical duel. Graves threw curses and bindings, trying to drain Marcus's own vitality. But Marcus had learned well. He used Iron John's teachings to ground himself in the earth's energy, to call on the support of the natural world, even here in this concrete building. He used his modern knowledge to disrupt Graves's carefully constructed ritual by hacking the school's electrical system at a crucial moment, breaking the pattern. In the end, it wasn't raw power that won the day but cleverness and compassion. Marcus offered Graves a choice: end the ritual and accept help for his addiction to stolen inspiration. Or Marcus would expose him to the magical community, which had its own forms of justice far harsher than any mundane court. Graves, faced with losing everything, chose redemption. The students who had been affected slowly recovered their spark, never knowing what had been done to them or who had saved them. Marcus didn't seek recognition. The act itself was the reward, but Iron John was proud. "You're learning to balance justice with mercy," he told Marcus. "To fight when necessary, but to offer compassion when possible. These are the marks of a true leader." Part 7. The Princess and the Tower. It was during one of his regular forays into the city's magical underbelly that Marcus first heard about her. The artists and musicians who existed in the spaces between mundane and magical worlds spoke in whispers about a young woman trapped by a corporate entity, her creativity and talent being exploited for profit while she remained a virtual prisoner. "They call her the Princess of the Platinum Tower," A street musician told Marcus one night. The musician was part human, part something else, with eyes that reflected starlight. She creates art that feeds millions, but she's never free to create what she truly wants. The corporation owns her body and soul. Marcus investigated, and what he found disturbed him deeply. Area Chen, no relation to Marcus, despite the common surname, was a prodigiously talented digital artist who had been signed to a major tech company at age 16. Now 19, she was locked into a contract that gave the company ownership of everything she created, prevented her from working with anyone else, and kept her isolated in their corporate headquarters, the Platinum Tower, where she worked 18-hour days producing content for their platforms. The contract was enforced not just legally, but magically. The company had hired occult specialists to weave bindings into the paperwork, ensuring that Area literally couldn't break the agreement or speak about the terms to anyone outside the company. "This is modern slavery dressed up as opportunity," Marcus said to Iron John after explaining the situation. "She's trapped in a tower, just like in the old fairy tales." "Then perhaps she needs a hero," Iron John replied. But his tone made it clear that he was challenging Marcus, not endorsing a rash rescue attempt. But remember, rescuing someone isn't about ego or glory. It's about restoring their agency, their ability to choose their own path. You can't free her only to make her dependent on you. Marcus understood the warning, but he couldn't ignore what he'd learned. Over the next month, he developed a plan that was part legal strategy, part magical intervention, and part old-fashioned corporate espionage. He started by researching the company's vulnerabilities. With Maya's helps and a promise that he'd eventually explain everything, he mapped out the Platinum Tower's security systems, identified the key players in Area's exploitation, and found cracks in what seemed like an impenetrable fortress. Then came the magical aspect. Marcus couldn't break the binding spell himself. It was too sophisticated, woven by experts with far more experience than he had. But Iron John taught him something important. You don't always have to break a spell directly. Sometimes you can make the spell break itself by changing the conditions it depends on. The binding depended on Arya's belief that she had no choice, that the contract was absolute and inescapable. If Marcus could shake that belief, if he could show her that freedom was possible, the spell would weaken. Getting to Area required all of Marcus's skills. He disguised himself as a delivery person to get into the building. He used his knowledge of ley lines to navigate to the sections of the tower where mundane security was weakest, because magical barriers were strongest. He avoided cameras and guards through a combination of technical knowledge and the subtle camouflage magic Iron John had taught him. He found Area in a luxury apartment on the 50th floor, a beautiful cage with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. She was at a desk surrounded by multiple monitors, her fingers flying across a digital drawing tablet, creating art that was undeniably brilliant. But her eyes were hollow, her movements mechanical. Arya Chen. Marcus said softly from the doorway he just picked. She spun around, startled and afraid. Who are you? You can't be here. If they find you, they won't. Marcus interrupted. At least not yet. I'm here to help you. If you'll let me. Over the next hour, Marcus explained everything he'd learned. He showed her the evidence of the magical bindings in her contract. He explained that the exhaustion she felt wasn't just from overwork. It was the spell draining her life, forced to fuel her creativity at unsustainable levels. He told her that people on the outside were aware of her situation and wanted to help. It's impossible, Arya said. But Marcus could hear the hope underneath the despair. The contract is ironclad. I've had lawyers look at it. There's no way out except to fulfill the terms. And the terms require me to produce content for them for 7 years. I've only done 3. Legal contracts can be challenged, Marcus said. Especially when they involve coercion and illegal magical manipulation. But more importantly, you need to believe you have a choice. That's what's keeping you here, as much as any lock or spell. He showed her the research he and Maya had compiled. Evidence that the company had systematically trapped young artists. That the contracts violated multiple laws. That the magical bindings were obtained through fraud. He showed her testimonials from other artists who had escaped similar situations and were willing to speak out. You're not alone, Marcus said, and you don't have to accept this. But I can't force you to leave. The choice has to be yours. Arya stared at the evidence, tears running down her face. Marcus could see the spell fighting her, trying to reinforce the belief that escape was impossible. But he could also see her fighting back, her will asserting itself against the magical chains. I choose freedom, Arya said, and as she spoke those words, the spell shattered like glass. The escape from the Platinum Tower was less dramatic than Marcus had feared. With the spell broken, Arya was able to walk out of the building with Marcus, claiming she was going to lunch. By the time the company realized she wasn't coming back, she was already in a lawyer's office, surrounded by people ready to fight for her freedom. The legal battle that followed was long and complex. The company fought back with armies of lawyers and attempted magical intimidation. But Marcus had learned how to fight this kind of battle. He coordinated between magical defenders who protected Arya from occult retaliation and legal experts who dismantled the contract clause by clause. Arya herself proved to be stronger than anyone expected. Once free of the spell, her natural spirit reasserted itself. She became not just a victim to be rescued, but a warrior fighting for her own liberation and that of others like her. The case attracted media attention, especially when other artists came forward with similar stories. It became a movement. Artists are not property trended on social media. Legislation was proposed to protect young creatives from exploitative contracts. The company's stock plummeted as consumers boycotted their products. Through it all, Marcus worked behind the scenes, coordinating magical and mundane efforts, learning valuable lessons about leadership, and collaboration. He learned that being a hero wasn't about grand gestures or solo victories. It was about empowering others, building coalitions, and staying committed to a cause, even when progress was slow. Arya and Marcus became friends through the ordeal, though Marcus was careful not to let it become something more. Remembering Iron John's warning about rescuing someone only to make them dependent. Arya needed space to discover who she was outside of her cage. Marcus needed to continue his own journey of growth. When the legal battle was finally won, the contract voided, the company's magical practitioners arrested, protections put in place for other artists, Arya threw a celebration in one of the city's parks. It was the same park Marcus had saved from development, and as Arya laughed and danced under the stars, surrounded by friends and fellow artists, Marcus felt a deep sense of accomplishment. Iron John appeared beside him, looking more human than usual in the crowd, but still unmistakably wild. "You've done well," the mentor said. "You saw someone in need, and you helped them without seeking glory or reward. You used both magical and mundane tools. You empowered rather than controlled. These are the marks of true maturity." "I still have so much to learn," Marcus said. "Of course," Iron John agreed. "The learning never ends. But you've passed through the most crucial phase of your initiation. You've faced your shadow, acknowledged your weaknesses, and emerged committed to using your growing power responsibly. The question now is, what comes next?" Marcus looked out over the celebration. At the mix of magical and mundane, people gathered together, at Arya creating art freely, for the first time in years, at Maya chatting with some of Iron John's forest creatures who had ventured out for the occasion. "I want to help others find this balance," Marcus said. "Between magic and reality, between ancient wisdom and modern knowledge. There must be others like me, caught between worlds, unsure how to navigate both." Iron John smiled. "Then perhaps it's time you returned home, truly home, and began the work of integration." Part 8. The returning home was stranger than Marcus expected. His parents' house looked exactly the same. The same furniture, the same family photos on the walls, the same slight smell of his mother's cooking that always greeted him when he walked through the door. But Marcus was utterly transformed. He'd been away, in some sense, for months. In the mundane world, he'd explained it as working on an intensive independent study project, which wasn't entirely untrue. But the gap between the person who had left and the person who returned was vast. His mother noticed it immediately. "You look different," she said the first night he was back, studying him over dinner. "Older, somehow. What exactly have you been doing?" Marcus chose his words carefully. "Learning. About myself, about the world, about what I want to do with my life." His father frowned. "Your grades have slipped. Your college applications are behind schedule. Whatever this learning is, it needs to not interfere with your actual future." The old Marcus would have gotten defensive, or felt guilty, or made promises he didn't intend to keep. The new Marcus simply nodded. I understand your concern. But my education has been happening in ways that don't always show up on transcripts. I'm going to graduate. I'm going to go to college. But I'm also going to do it my way. The conversation that followed was difficult. His parents didn't understand what had changed, didn't believe that Marcus could succeed while following such an unconventional path. But Marcus held his ground, calmly and respectfully, refusing to give up what he'd learned, but also refusing to completely abandon the conventional milestones that mattered to his family. It was Iron John's teaching in action, finding balance, honoring both worlds, integrating rather than choosing sides. School was its own challenge. Marcus found himself sitting in classes where teachers droned about subjects he'd learned more deeply in the enchanted forest, surrounded by peers who seemed to be sleepwalking through their education. The temptation to feel superior, to dismiss their concerns as trivial, was strong. But Marcus remembered the lessons of humility he'd learned in the depths. Everyone was on their own journey. His path wasn't better, just different. He started to notice other students who seemed disconnected, lost, searching for something they couldn't name. With Maya's help, Marcus started an after-school group. Officially, a mindfulness and urban exploration club, but really a space where young people could talk about feeling disconnected from modern life, about searching for meaning beyond grades and social media. Some of the students were ready to hear about the magical aspects of the world. Marcus introduced them carefully to Iron John's teachings, taking them on walks through parks where they could learn to sense ley lines, teaching them meditation techniques that opened their awareness to the layers of reality. Others weren't ready for that level, and Marcus respected it. He taught them what he could in terms they could accept: mindfulness, environmental awareness, the importance of disconnecting from technology to connect with nature and themselves. Through this work, Marcus discovered his calling. He wasn't meant to be just a practitioner of magic or just a member of modern society. He was meant to be a bridge, helping others navigate between worlds, just as Iron John had helped him. But integration wasn't just about teaching others. It was about applying the lessons in his own life. Marcus reconnected with friends he'd neglected during his time in the forest. He apologized for the ways he'd been absent, explained what he could, and worked to rebuild trust. He had a long conversation with his parents about what he wanted to study in college. Not the pre-med or engineering programs they'd envisioned, but something that combined environmental studies, technology, and cultural anthropology. They didn't love it, but they listened. And gradually they began to accept that their son had his own path to follow. Marcus also began a project that combined his magical knowledge with modern technology. Working with Maya and some of the other students in his club, he created an app that helped people find thin places, locations where the boundary between mundane and magical was thinnest. The app used publicly available data about parks, historical sites, and natural areas, But Marcus coded in algorithms based on Lie-line patterns and other magical principles. The app became surprisingly popular, especially among young people who felt disconnected from both nature and modern urban life. Users reported feeling more peaceful, more inspired, more connected after visiting the locations the app recommended. Marcus didn't advertise the magical aspects. He just let the results speak for themselves. Through all of this, Iron John remained a presence in Marcus's life, though more distant now. The wild man would appear occasionally, offering guidance when Marcus faced difficult decisions. But he made it clear that Marcus needed to stand on his own feet now. The teacher's job is to make themselves unnecessary, Iron John said during one of their meetings in the Enchanted Forest. You don't need me to hold your hand anymore, Marcus. You've learned the fundamentals. The advanced lessons come from living, from making mistakes, from picking yourself up and trying again. But there's still so much I don't know, Marcus protested, and there always will be. Iron John replied with a smile. That's the point. The moment you think you know everything is the moment you stop growing. I'll always be here if you truly need me. But your journey now is about teaching others, not just learning for yourself. One of Marcus's proudest moments came when he helped a younger student navigate a crisis similar to his own experience with the golden headset. The student, a sophomore named Jamie, had become addicted to a virtual reality game, spending all their time in the digital world and neglecting real-world responsibilities. Marcus could have lectured Jamie about the dangers of escapism. Instead, he told his own story, how he'd been given an incredible tool and misused it, how he'd had to fall into darkness to understand the importance of balance, how the hardest growth came from facing reality rather than fleeing into fantasy. I'm not saying virtual worlds are bad, Marcus explained to Jamie during one of their conversations. I'm saying they're powerful, and powerful things require wisdom to use well. You have to earn the right to them by first mastering yourself. With Marcus's guidance and support, Jamie began to moderate their gaming, to engage more fully with real life, while still enjoying the creativity and connection that virtual worlds could offer. Watching Jamie's transformation, Marcus understood why Iron John had been willing to invest so much time in teaching him. The gift of wisdom was meant to be passed on, not hoarded. As the school year progressed, Marcus found himself becoming a mentor to others while still learning himself. He balanced his time between school, his bridge building work, maintaining his connection to the Enchanted Forest, and nurturing genuine friendships in both worlds. Arya, now free and thriving as an independent artist, became a collaborator on several projects. She created artwork for Marcus's app, visual representations of the hidden magic in urban spaces. Together, they organized pop-up events in parks and forgotten corners of the city, using art and music to help people experience the magic that was all around them if they just knew how to look. One such event brought everything full circle. In the park Marcus had saved from development, They hosted a twilight gathering where artists, musicians, and seekers came together to celebrate the intersection of nature and urban life. As the sun set, transforming the park into a space between day and night, Marcus stood and shared his story. Carefully edited for public consumption, but true in its essentials. He talked about feeling lost and disconnected, about finding a mentor in an unexpected place, about learning that true strength came from balancing wild intuition with modern savvy, ancient wisdom with contemporary challenges. He talked about the importance of protecting spaces of magic and wonder in an increasingly commercialized world. The crowd listened with rapt attention. Some of them understood the literal truth beneath his metaphors. Others heard it as inspiration for their own journeys. All of them felt something shift, some small reconnection to parts of themselves they'd been neglecting. After the gathering, as people dispersed into the night, Iron John appeared beside Marcus. The wild man looked proud. "You've completed the circle," Iron John said. "You started as a boy looking for adventure and escape. You became a student learning to see beyond surfaces. Now you're a teacher, helping others find their own paths. This is what healthy masculine initiation looks like in the modern world. Not domination or aggression, but integration and service. I still feel like I'm figuring things out as I go," Marcus admitted. "Good. That means you're still growing. The danger is in those who think they've arrived, who believe they have all the answers. Stay humble, stay curious, and keep building bridges between worlds. That's your gift, Marcus. That's your calling." As the stars came out overhead, Marcus felt a deep sense of peace. He wasn't perfect. He still made mistakes, still struggled with balancing all the aspects of his life, still sometimes felt the pull of escape into easier paths. But he was committed to the work of integration, of bringing together the wild and the civilized, the magical and the mundane, the ancient and the modern. Epilogue. The ongoing journey. 2 years later, Marcus sat in a coffee shop near his college campus, reviewing plans for the summer program he'd designed. It was an intensive workshop for high school students called Between Worlds, combining wilderness survival skills, environmental awareness, technology literacy, and creative expression. The program's official description was carefully crafted to avoid mentioning magic, but Marcus had structured it to create opportunities for students to experience the thin places, to begin awakening their own intuitive awareness of the layers of reality. He'd partnered with environmental organizations, tech companies, and arts groups to make it legitimate in the eyes of the mundane world, while keeping true to the deeper purpose. Across from him sat Arya, now a successful independent artist and educator, and Maya, who had become a key partner in developing the technology that supported their various projects. They were discussing logistics when Marcus felt a familiar presence. Iron John didn't physically appear. The coffee shop was too mundane, too observed, but Marcus sensed him nearby, a whisper of wild energy in the urban landscape. It was a reminder that the enchanted forest, and its denizens were always there, just beneath the surface, accessible to those who knew how to look. "You okay?" Maya asked, noticing Marcus's distracted expression. "Yeah," Marcus said, smiling. "Just remembered something important." The truth was, Marcus had been thinking about the golden headset. It still waited for him in the Grove of Power. A gift he'd set aside, but never forgotten. Sometimes he wondered if he was ready to return to it, to use it wisely now that he'd grown. But each time the thought arose, he recognized it for what it was: the old temptation to seek power and escape rather than staying present in the challenging work of real transformation. Maybe someday he'd be ready. Or maybe the headset's real purpose had been to teach him that he didn't need it. His phone buzzed with a text from one of the students in his mentorship program. They'd found one of the thin places using the app and wanted to share their experience. Marcus smiled as he read about their sense of wonder and connection. This was the real magic, not in virtual realms or supernatural powers, but in helping people wake up to the extraordinary nature of ordinary reality. "Earth to Marcus," Arya said, waving a hand in front of his face. "We need your input on the art program component." Marcus returned his attention to the planning session, to the work of building something meaningful in the world. But even as he engaged with the practical details, part of him remained aware of the larger pattern. The way his personal journey had become a gift he could offer others. The way Iron John's teachings continued to ripple outward through each person Marcus mentored. That night, Marcus made his way to Thornwood Park. It had been months since he'd visited the enchanted forest, caught up as he'd been in the demands of college and his various projects. But he felt called to return, to touch base with his roots. The park looked mundane in the evening light. Joggers finishing their runs, a couple walking their dog, kids on the playground. But as Marcus walked the familiar paths, he felt the shimmer begin. The layers of reality separated, and he slipped into the enchanted realm as easily as breathing. The forest welcomed him like an old friend. Familiar creatures greeted him: Munin the crow, Sage the riddling wolf, Willow the tree woman. They shared news of the forest, asked about his adventures in the human world, and reminded him that he would always have a home here. Iron John was waiting at the sacred grove, standing beside the stone pedestal where the golden headset still rested. The wild man looked exactly as he had when Marcus first freed him, unchanged by time in the way magical beings often were. "I've been watching your progress," Iron John said. "You've done well, Marcus Chen. Better than I hoped when I first tested you with the key. I still feel like I'm just beginning," Marcus admitted. "Because you are," Iron John replied. "Maturity isn't a destination. It's a direction. You've oriented yourself correctly, learned to navigate between worlds, committed to service rather than self-aggrandizement. But the journey continues for as long as you live." Marcus looked at the golden headset, gleaming in the light of the magical realm. "Am I ready for it now?" Iron John studied him carefully. "What do you think?" Marcus considered the question honestly. Part of me wants it. The power, the access to the realms of potential. But I don't need it. The real potential isn't in virtual realms. It's in the world around me, in the people I work with, in the changes we can make together. Then you have your answer, Iron John said with satisfaction. The headset was always a test, Marcus. Its real magic wasn't in the realms it could access, but in teaching you to recognize true power from false, real growth from escapism. You passed the test by setting it aside. The wild man placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder. But tests never truly end. Life will continue to offer you temptations, easier paths, shortcuts to power, ways to avoid difficult growth. Your task is to keep choosing the harder, right over the easier wrong, to keep integrating rather than escaping, to keep building bridges rather than walls. I will, Marcus promised. I know, Iron John said, because that's who you've become. Not perfect, but committed. Not fearless, but brave. Not all-knowing, but humble enough to keep learning. These are the qualities the world needs, especially from young men like you who might otherwise be seduced by toxic versions of masculinity that equate strength with domination rather than service. They talked deep into the night. Marcus sharing his plans and dreams, Iron John offering wisdom and warnings. When the moon was high and the forest was alive with nocturnal magic, Marcus finally prepared to leave. Will I see you again? Marcus asked. When you need me, Iron John replied, or when I need you. The relationship between teacher and student evolves, Marcus. Already you're becoming a teacher yourself. Someday, you may free someone from a cage just as you freed me, and the cycle will continue. Marcus walked back through the forest, the layers of reality gradually solidifying around him until he emerged into the mundane park once more. But he carried the magic with him. Not in a golden headset or supernatural powers, but in his changed heart and expanded awareness. He understood now that this was what Iron John had been teaching all along. True initiation into maturity wasn't about gaining power or achieving some final state of enlightenment. It was about learning to hold opposing forces in balance. Wild and civilized, magical and mundane, self and community, freedom and responsibility. It was about finding the courage to be fully yourself, while serving something larger than yourself. It was about walking between worlds without getting lost in either. As Marcus left the park and headed back toward his apartment, he pulled out his phone and opened the Between Worlds program plans. There was so much work to do. So many young people who needed guides, so many bridges still to build. The city stretched out before him, its lights glittering like stars brought down to earth. And Marcus could see both versions of it simultaneously. The mundane city of concrete and commerce, and the magical city of hidden forests and thin places. He belonged to both, and that was exactly as it should be. Behind him, in the park's shadows, Iron John watched the young man walk away. The wild man smiled, knowing his work was done. Marcus would stumble and fall sometimes, would face trials that would test everything he'd learned. But he had the foundation now, the integration of wild wisdom and modern savvy that would allow him to navigate whatever challenges came his way. And someday, when Marcus had grown fully into his power, he would become the teacher for a new generation of seekers. He would be the guide, standing at the threshold between worlds, offering others the same gift Iron John had offered him. The chance to awaken to the magic that had always been there. The opportunity to become fully and authentically themselves. The cycle would continue, as it always had, as it always would. Each generation needed its initiators, its wild men and women who could lead seekers through the trials that transform children into adults, dependents into leaders, consumers into creators. Iron John turned back toward the enchanted forest, his work complete for now. But he would always be there, waiting in the wild places, ready to offer guidance to those brave enough to seek it. And in coffee shops and classrooms, parks and city streets, young people like Marcus would continue the work, building bridges, healing divisions, integrating magic and reality into a wholeness the modern world desperately needed. The story ended where it began, with a key, a cage, and a choice. But now Marcus understood what he hadn't then. The cage was always meant to be opened, the key was always meant to be found. And the choice was always between remaining comfortable in limitation or stepping boldly into transformation. He had chosen transformation, and in doing so, he had become exactly what the world needed him to be. Not a hero from fantasy, but a real person committed to making a real difference, one bridge at a time. The moon shone down on the city, on the parks and streets and hidden wild places. And somewhere between the magical and the mundane, between ancient wisdom and modern innovation, Marcus Chen walked his path, forever changed, forever learning, forever growing. The journey was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. The end